Hello all, and welcome to my talk about philosophy at UWC. My name is Kyle Seakgwa, and I am a lecturer in the philosophy department here at UWC. It's my pleasure to be the one today to tell you all about what philosophy is and what philosophy at UWC has to offer you. Okay, so I think obviously as my previous sentence may have indicated, good place to start when you are talking about whether or not you want to do philosophy as a major is kind of just figuring out, well, what is philosophy, right? Because philosophy is a bit different from some of the other subjects that you are able to do as a BA student, right? Because subjects like English and history will have already had some exposure to at school, but philosophy is a bit different. So what is philosophy? I think a good place to start is just kind of thinking about where we may have come across philosophy already, maybe even without knowing it. So I have a few lines on the slide here, I hope you all can see. And I'm just going to focus on the middle line there. So, is pious pious because God loves pious? Socrates asks whose pious you'll seek, or for Plato's screech. And as you can see, that is a line from a song, 2011 song I think, by Jay-Z and Kanye West. And it makes reference to both Socrates and Plato, who are widely considered as the people, or among the people who started philosophical inquiry, at least in the left. So, I mean, in the West. So, these are big and famous rappers, definitely, but I think they're referencing even bigger and more famous philosophers. So, on the left there, you have Plato, and on the right, you have Socrates, who was actually his teacher. But this is all to basically say that even though philosophy may sound like this kind of pie in the sky thing that you only come across when you're at university, it is in fact something that even people like rappers or normal everyday people think about, right? It's not just a kind of a dead subject that didn't die with Plato and Socrates. Okay. So, although now we know that you may have had exposure into philosophy without even knowing it, that still doesn't answer the question, right? So, what is it that you had exposure to without knowing? And for our purposes here, I think that one of the ways of thinking about what philosophy is thinking about it as a collection of big questions. So, questions that are usually considered too broad or too vague for other disciplines to even try and answer. That's the sort of thing that philosophers like to take on. So, what sorts of questions do I have in mind here? Well, they are ethical questions, right? So these are questions about what is the right way to behave and live one's life. Questions like, is abortion right or wrong? Those are both ethical issues, right? So questions about basically right versus wrong, but even more deeply, what makes something right versus what makes something wrong. Another set of questions that is also quite interesting and is also definitely philosophical are questions that fall under the heading of political philosophy. So questions like, what is justice? Or how should a just society be organized? Who should be our rulers and how should they be elected? These are questions that, while they are obviously partly political, they are so broad that they become philosophical, and that you're not going to do one kind of study of a 1-year election and get the answers to those questions, right? You're actually going to have to not only just do what the political scientist would do, but you also have to really do a lot of kind of very rigorous thinking that is basically the trademark of philosophy. So all these questions, right? Questions of ethics so far, questions of politics, or political philosophy, but also questions of race come up in philosophy, right? So what is race, right? Is it a biological thing? Is it just a social construction? Some people in South Africa are of the opinion that race is something that the apartheid government invented to control us. That's a possible view. So what is it? And philosophers try and figure out which answer is the right one with questions like that. And then also, maybe even more importantly, questions like what is racism? Is it a thing about what you believe? Do you have to believe terrible things about a racial group in order to count as a racist? Or is it bad enough when you maybe don't mean to feel any sort of way when you come across them, but nonetheless, when you come across a person of the opposite race, you feel fear? Does that make you count as a racist? Some people would say yes, some people would say no. And philosophers again try and see which answer is the correct one. So yeah, I think I've given you some sense of the sorts of things that philosophers spend their time thinking about and working on. Okay, so let's dive a bit deeper into one of these areas, right? So let's look at which is actually the course I'm teaching at the moment, which would be philosophy of race. But actually, before we get there, I just want you to note that this picture on the slide at the moment is a picture of a philosopher by the name of Judith Jarvis Thomson. And this is just to give you a sense that not all philosophers look like the two that I put on the previous slide. So not all of them are bearded white men and old. Some of them are ladies. We also have people of color. So quite an influential philosopher named Anthony Appiah, who's done a lot of good work on philosophy of race. So philosophy in the 21st century answers these big questions, and it's not just the people that used to answer these questions tackling it, right? So it's not just white men that have a chance to answer and tackle these questions these days, but philosophy is also becoming a lot broader in including a more diverse population of philosophers. So as I was saying, let's look a bit at the field where Anthony Appiah, the guy at the bottom, contributed, or is most famous for contributing to. Right, so let's look at questions in philosophy of race. And one way that philosophers go about this is they will give you what's known as a thought experiment, right? So here's a thought experiment for you. Put your picture on the slide as well. So here we have a story of Susie, right? We are told that Susie is a middle-aged woman. She looks white in inverted commas. To the average person on the street, she looks white to the average person on the street. She was raised to believe she was white. Co-workers and friends all think of her as white. And now in her mid-40s, she discovers that she has a couple of black ancestors, such that her great-great-great-grandparents consist of 2 black people and 30 white people. Susie is, and I actually want you to think about this, right? So I'm going to give you a few options, and you tell me which option you think is the right one. Or at least you think about which option you think is the right one. So, is it A, is Susie white? Is it B, Susie's black? Is it C, Susie's mixed? Is it D, sometimes white, so sometimes Susie's white, sometimes Susie's black? Or is it E, none of the above? Okay, so I hope you've all gotten a chance to think about it. Just so you know, so I can put you out to your suspense, most people tend to say that Susie is in fact white, right? So despite her having black ancestry somewhere down the line, she herself still counts as white. That's at least what most people think. But then most people don't realize that despite the fact that it seems so obvious that the lady that I just showed on that slide and the story I just told you about her, that the lady, that lady is white, right? But up until not that long ago in some US states, that obvious answer that seems to come to most of us was in fact considered the wrong answer. So there were states in America that used what was known as the one-drop rule. And so under that system, Susie would be considered black, right? So she would legally be considered a black person, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and assume that we all do, or most of us at least, disagree with that, right? So we don't think that Susie is actually black. So now here's where the kind of real philosophical work gets, where you get to the real philosophical work. How do you justify your answer then, right? So what argument do you use to say that those old-timey Americans were wrong, Susie is not black, Susie is most definitely white, right? You can't just assert that, right? Because remember, philosophers aren't just giving their opinions, they have to back this up with some kind of argument based in evidence. So the question is, how do you argue against the American senator, let's say, who thinks that this is the way to go and that race is a matter of how many, if you just have one black ancestor, you're black. You have to argue with him, but how do you argue with him? And that's kind of what philosophers do. They try and follow the evidence and follow the arguments to get to the answer that's most likely to be true. Right, and that is applied here in race as well, right? So we see with the question about what race should Susie count as. We could also then go further and say, well, if the American man that or the American senator that's trying to push a system under which Susie is black, given that we disagree with that system, what is the right system, right? How should racial classification work, right? What should the boundaries be? Or even, should there even be a racial classification system, right? There are some arguments that there shouldn't, that race is a made-up thing, and we ought to do away with it, right? It's the same as kind of believing in Santa or believing in unicorns. Sorry if anyone in the audience still believes in those. But unfortunately they aren't real, and some philosophers say that the same thing goes for race, right? And all of this is done with argumentation to back up these positions. Yeah, and the rule that I was referring to, under which Susie would count as black, is known as the one-drop rule, in case anybody wants to do any further research on that. But as I was kind of intimating in the last slide already, right, what makes philosophy special in a way is that it not only tries to answer these big questions, but it tries to answer it in a rigorous way where you can actually point to the evidence and say, this is why I'm saying what I'm saying. And then that leaves you open, that leaves the floor open for someone else who maybe finds an issue with your evidence or has evidence of their own to kind of still to take you on, basically, to try and find truth given what is already on the table. So it's a kind of conversation where you're really trying to get to the truth at the end of the day, given all the evidence that's in play. Right? And in order to do that, we use things like let me reiterate this. In order to do that, you have to learn skills that not only apply to these kind of big questions, right? So what you learn in philosophy isn't only applicable to philosophy. What you learn in philosophy, a lot of which is what's known as transferable skills, right? So these are skills that basically aren't only helpful in a particular field, right? They are helpful in multiple fields. So skills like basic logic, right? In order to build arguments, you need to know how logic works. Argumentation, right? So what sorts of mistakes are most prevalent when people try and make arguments, right? How do you avoid those mistakes yourself? Then obviously it's coming up with the argument is only half the work, right? You actually have to write it down, and therefore we teach you argumentative writing, right? So this is how to write in order to get your point across in the most persuasive way possible, basically. And that's a skill that obviously philosophy isn't the only place where you're going to need to get a point across, right? So if you know how to put your ideas into a kind of chain where it's obvious to the person that you're trying to communicate to why you believe what you believe and why they should also believe it, that's a skill that's not only helpful in philosophy but also basically anywhere. And then I think that together, right, this kind of package of basic logic and argumentation and argumentative writing actually make quite a powerful problem-solving toolkit, because there are often times when there are disputes, not just in philosophy but outside, where exactly the skills I just listed there are the skills that are needed to resolve the issue at hand. Okay, so a question that I think is important and that should be addressed is you might say to me, so okay, you buy that these big questions are interesting, you buy that the skills you learn are going to be applicable in a wide range of fields, but if you do philosophy, are you going to, or if you have philosophy as a major, are you going to be employable once you leave? And I think the answer to that I would give is yes, right? So you would not expect it because you don't often come across philosophers in the workforce. But as I said, right, even if your name, if your job title isn't philosopher at the end of the day, which it most likely won't be, because in order to become a philosopher proper, you kind of have to go a bit higher than an undergraduate degree. But even with an undergraduate degree, right, you still have those skills I was talking to you about. And those skills are still applicable in the wide range of fields that I was alluding to, right? And I think that because there are this kind of package of transferable skills that philosophers learn, that at least partly explains why the figures for for people with BA in philosophy, in terms of how much they earn 10 years into their working career, so 10 years out of university, how do philosophy BAs do? They do quite well actually compared to many other of the humanities fields. So you can see the annual salary on the slide at the moment, so that's the average. Obviously I'm not guaranteeing this because philosophy obviously doesn't train you for any particular one job, right? What we are trying to do is teach you skills and ways of thinking that are helpful, if not everywhere, then nearly everywhere. So you're definitely not going to be, say, like a lawyer, just walk into a law firm, but the skills you have will make you attractive to employers in various fields. So for instance, the top kind of paying jobs that philosophers tend to go into are project manager, marketing specialist, digital marketing manager, HR administrator, and the list goes on, right? So I definitely do think that philosophy is going to stand you in good stead to compete for one of these careers, right? Even though we haven't trained you specifically for any particular one of them. With that being said, though, I do think that it's smart to always kind of hedge your bets as much as you can. So kind of do whatever you can to make sure that you're going to be where you want to be at the end of the day. And with that in mind, I would recommend that even though philosophy is very good to have as like a general kind of thinking tool and is employable, there are other majors, right, that you can take with philosophy that will stand you in even better stead to get into a specific career if you already know what career you want to go into, right? So what do I mean, right? Let me give you some examples. So for instance, as part of the BA undergrad here at UWC, the BA General, you can also major in politics, right? And if you have a politics and philosophy major, that's quite a good combination for anyone who's interested in a career anywhere near politics or IR. Another example is if you take industrial psychology, which is also a possible major in the arts faculty at UWC as part of the PA General, and you major in philosophy and industrial psychology, that will stand you in very good stead for a career in HR. And philosophy and English is a good combination of majors if you want to do anything in the writing sphere. So I definitely do think that to get the most out of it, you should look into what you are interested in and what other majors can complement your philosophical education. With that being said, I think that the philosophy itself has a lot to offer in terms of how it makes you think a lot clearly no matter what the subject is, or a lot more clearly no matter what the subject you're thinking about is. Okay, so hopefully I've sold you all already and you are all going to run to enroll in the philosophy major next year. And just to give you a kind of heads up on what to expect when you get there. So what does our BA major in philosophy look like at UWC? So in order to get the philosophy major, you have to complete all the courses I'm about to list. And this is obviously just the philosophy portion of the degree, right? So if you are double majoring, it will be this in addition to whatever you major in. I'm just going to cover the philosophy here. So in first year, right, so it's a 3-year degree. In first year, you do an introduction to philosophy, where we basically take you through some of the influential texts that have been written by philosophers over the centuries, and kind of introduce you to the landscape of philosophy and what are the sorts of things that philosophers have been thinking and talking about for millennia. Then your next module, which I actually think you take the following semester, would be Introduction to Moral and Political Philosophy. And I already said a bit about some of the questions you tackle in this field, right? So these are questions about what is right versus wrong, and questions about, say, for instance, what does a just political arrangement look like? And you're going to get introduced to kind of the arguments on all sides of those questions in this introduction to moral and political philosophy. Then in second year, you do classical and contemporary conceptual problems, and that's basically looking at issues that have been basically bugging philosophers for millennia and still are, and kind of looking at some of the old and recent writing on a given topic. And I think generally we tend to focus on the philosophy of mind in this course, so you'll be meeting issues about, say, for instance, what's the relation between mind and body? Is everything just material, or is everything somehow made up of mental stuff? Is everything in someone's head? So those sorts of questions are the ones you're most likely to come across in that module. Then 5213, which is Introduction to Argumentation and Conceptual Analysis. So this is where we teach you some of those skills I was talking about in the previous slides. So we teach you basic logic, we teach you basic argumentation, we teach you fallacies, so problems that usually crop up in arguments and how to avoid them and spot them. And so on. So this is really a course where we try and teach you the skills you need in order to engage in the kind of evidence-based thinking that I was talking about as the trademark of philosophers. Then you do a course in the Enlightenment and the Problem of Knowledge, and here you get introduced to another area of philosophy I didn't mention on the opening slide, or one of the opening slides, which is known as epistemology, where we ask questions about basically what is knowledge, how do you know when you know something, questions like that, right? And then, okay, so when you're done with epistemology, you then end the year with learning a bit about African philosophy. and this is well, compared to Plato and Socrates, it's a bit new, right? So only recently have people on the African continent kind of started writing down philosophy in the way that many other philosophical thinkers from other places were doing for a while. But just because we didn't write it down for a long time doesn't mean that there was no philosophy there, right? So in African philosophy, we basically learn about, and our Africans historically have kind of come up with their own uh, kind of answers to philosophical questions, and sometimes not written down, sometimes in the form of stories and kind of various other oral traditions. But nonetheless, now that we have the tools to be able to kind of think through these things in writing, uh, that's what we do, and that's what you'll learn about in African philosophy. Kind of how what does philosophy mean when it's not done by the Platos and the Socrates, but rather by the African philosophers. And then in your third and final year, you take current in modern philosophy, and they again tackle some contemporary issues, so some issues that people are talking about these days in philosophy. And here we usually focus on a kind of more in-depth tour of political philosophy and kind of what more recent political philosophers are saying. After that, you have a more in-depth survey of moral philosophy. We try and focus on what moral philosophers who have written somewhat recently have to say about moral philosophy. And then you take a course called Issues in Contemporary Philosophy, and this is also a course where you are introduced to another field of philosophy. So we don't usually have any particular one that we go with every year, but this is really trying to focus you on getting you somewhat up to date with some of the work that's been done in philosophy nowadays, and trying to engage with that yourself and kind of give you the tools to think in a way that you can kind of interrogate philosophical work that is more recent. And then finally, as one of your final modules, you do the course which I'm currently teaching, which is the philosophy of race, culture, and identity, where you get to tackle some of the issues that we already sort of started thinking about in this talk, right? So questions about what race or what is race, what racial classification system should we use, right? Should Susie count as black or should Susie count as white, and why? What is race? What is racism? What is culture? What is racial identity? These are the questions you then tackle in this final third-year course. Okay, so now I hope you are all very excited and can't wait until the start of next year to come flock into the philosophy department. Look forward to seeing you all there, and thank you very much for your time.